There's a house at the far end of Crescent Lane that people rarely talk about, though every passerby seems to quicken their steps when approaching it. The bricks are weather-worn, tinged black at the mortar seams, and the roof sags slightly, as if exhausted under years of silence. Children crossing to the nearby school avert their gaze from its shuttered windows, and even the mailman, known for his stoic indifference, slides envelopes quickly through the rusting slot before shuffling away without pause. The house isn't abandoned, though. A dim glow often flickers in an upstairs room long after midnight that a young woman named Mara had rented the place, insisting she wasn't easily spooked by local legends. She was in her mid-20s, ambitious yet slightly reclusive, working as a freelance editor who valued solitude more than anything else. At first, the house provided exactly that: quiet halls, a backyard overtaken by ivy, and enough distance from the bustle of town to feel like her own world. But what she hadn't expected was how alive the silence could feel once the sun dipped beneath the trees, and how oppressive the air upstairs became after dark. Her first week there was uneventful until the fourth night, when she woke at 3:17 a.m. to the faint creaking of footsteps above her bedroom ceiling. It startled her because she had chosen the top floor, and there should have been no above. Sitting up, she listened closely, holding her breath, but the sound stopped. She convinced herself it was the old wood settling, but when she pressed her hand against the plaster above her bed, it felt faintly warm, as though someone, or something, was standing on the other side. The following morning, she searched for an attic entrance but found none. The ceiling was solid, no hatch or ladder, no hint of crawl space. That day she worked distractedly, every edit punctuated by her gaze lifting toward the ceiling. By evening she decided to dismiss it, rationalizing the experience as exhaustion from overwork. Yet as night fell again, her unease grew tangible, a quiet dread that seemed stitched into the walls themselves. And when she lay down to sleep, she found herself staring upward, waiting. Sure enough, at almost the exact same time, the footsteps returned, measured, deliberate, pacing slowly above her. She pressed a pillow over her head, fighting the urge to flee the room, but her legs wouldn't move. The steps continued for what felt like hours, until silence finally returned, leaving her wide-eyed in the dark, pulse thrumming in her throat. What unsettled her most wasn't just the impossibility of the sound, but the distinct impression that whatever was upstairs already knew she was listening. Mara tried to brush off the second night as coincidence. She told herself it was only the house settling, an old structure creaking against its own bones. Yet when daylight poured in through the dusty curtains, she felt more exhausted than before, her mind caught in a loop of listening. Every shadow seemed longer, every corner slightly darker than it should be. She poured coffee with shaking hands and caught herself glancing at the ceiling as though expecting it to stir again. By the fifth night, her nerves frayed. The footsteps hadn't just repeated, they had changed. Now they stopped directly above her bed, pausing long enough for her to count out 30 seconds, then started again in a different direction. The pacing was too purposeful, too precise. On the sixth night, she heard something new, the faint sound of something dragging, like fabric or rope being pulled slowly across the unseen floorboards above. That night she didn't sleep at all. The next morning, desperate for answers, Mara explored the house more thoroughly. In the upstairs hallway, she noticed an irregular seam in the wallpaper behind an old bookcase. Pulling it away, she uncovered a narrow door, painted shut, its handle rusted stiff. Her heart pounded as she ran her fingers along the edges, realizing it must lead to the attic she had assumed didn't exist. The discovery filled her with both relief and dread. Relief that there was an explanation, dread because now she had to decide whether to open that night. She moved a chair beneath the door and sat with her phone in hand, its camera recording. At 3:17 a.m., like clockwork, the noises began. The same deliberate pacing, the same dragging. Her phone trembled slightly in her grip as she aimed it at the sealed door. Then, unmistakably, the handle twitched, not a settling creak, not a shift of old metal, but a deliberate rattle, as though someone was testing it from the other side. Mara froze, unable to breathe. Until the sound stopped at in the morning, she reviewed the footage. Most of it was nothing, grainy shadows, silence, the faint hum of the fridge downstairs. But at precisely 3:18, The camera captured the handle's twitch. And then, for a single second, a whisper. A word so faint she had to replay it 20 times before she was certain she hadn't imagined it. The voice was hoarse, male, and close enough to the microphone that it seemed to breathe into her ear. Don't open it. Mara couldn't shake the whisper from her mind. Don't open it. She repeated the words over and over, not sure if they were a warning, a threat, or a trick. Her rational side told her she had recorded a stray noise. Old pipes, maybe, or wind brushing past a vent. But every time she pressed replay, the cadence remained unmistakably human. She found herself lowering the volume, not because she couldn't bear to hear it again, but because it felt like playing it too loudly might summon whoever had spoken. She decided not to sleep in her bedroom anymore. Instead, she dragged her bedding into the downstairs living room, convincing herself she would be safer there, with no ceiling overhead for footsteps to echo across. But on the very first night, she learned that distance didn't matter. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the noises resumed, footsteps, dragging, but now muffled, as if carried down through the walls themselves. They didn't stay above, they traveled down the staircase, pausing on each step, groaning under invisible weight. Mara clutched her blanket to her chest, watching the shadows stretch along the living room walls. Her phone was in her hand again, its red recording light glowing faintly. The sounds grew louder until they reached the bottom step, then silence. She strained to listen, her pulse hammering. That was when the whisper came again, this time not from the phone, but from somewhere close, too close. Why did you move? The words felt hot, as if whispered directly into the shell of her ear, though no one stood behind her. Her scream echoed through the empty house, but no answer came. She flicked on every light, searching room by room, finding nothing. The silence that followed felt worse than the noise, as though the house itself was holding its breath. For the first time since moving in, she considered leaving, packing a bag, abandoning the lease, and never looking back. But when she opened the front door, she froze. The chain lock she had never used was fastened shut, though she had been certain it wasn't when she went to bed. Sleep was impossible after that. She stayed awake until dawn, pacing, trying to convince herself she hadn't imagined the voice. But her body betrayed her, exhaustion finally pulling her under late in the morning. When she woke, she found something new waiting. On her kitchen table, in the dust she hadn't yet cleaned, someone, or something, had traced a message with a fingertip. The letters were jagged, smeared, but clear enough to read. Go back upstairs. For the rest of the day, Mara avoided the upstairs entirely. She drifted from room to room on the lower floor, pacing like a caged animal, too afraid to leave yet too terrified to stay still. The message in the dust gnawed at her. Go back upstairs. She wiped it away with her sleeve, but the words clung to her mind, echoing as if they'd been etched directly into her thoughts. By evening, she felt the walls pressing closer, the air in the house heavier, as though the silence itself was pushing her toward the hidden door. She tried to distract herself with work, opening her laptop and forcing her eyes across sentences she couldn't comprehend. But the screen blurred, her attention constantly drawn upward. She began to hear faint taps from the ceiling above, not the heavy steps of before, but a slow, patient rhythm, like fingernails drumming wood. Each time she tried to ignore it, the tapping grew louder until it seemed to crawl through the plaster and into her skull. By midnight, Mara was trembling. She sat on the bottom step of the staircase, staring into the darkened hall above, her body locked between flight and compulsion. Her phone buzzed suddenly, making her jolt. It was a text from an unknown number. The message was short, chilling in its simplicity. It's time. She dropped the phone to the floor as her throat tightened. There was no way anyone could know what she was experiencing inside this house. Unless they were already here at 3:17 a.m., the house awoke again. The dragging sound returned, louder than ever, scraping directly across the boards above her bedroom ceiling. The door in the hallway rattled violently this time, the rusted handle twisting against its sealed frame. Mara backed against the wall, her chest heaving, her eyes fixed on the door. It wasn't just noise anymore. The old wood was bowing outward, as though something behind it was pressing, testing, eager to come through. Heart hammering, Mara moved closer, drawn despite every instinct screaming to run. She reached out and brushed her fingers against the handle. It was ice cold, a burning cold that made her skin sting. As her hand lingered, the rattling stopped instantly. Silence collapsed over the hall, heavier than before. Then, from the other side of the wood, came a single knock, slow, deliberate, echoing deep in the walls. Her breath hitched, and in that awful pause, she realized the truth. The door wasn't waiting to be opened. It was waiting for her to knock back. Mara stood frozen in the upstairs hallway, her palm still tingling from the icy burn of the handle. The silence stretched on, thicker than air, until she felt her own heartbeat in her teeth. She wanted to flee, to run downstairs, throw open the front door, and never look back. But the memory of the chain lock, and that message carved in dust, rooted her to the spot. Something in the house was corralling her, and she couldn't escape the sense that ignoring the door any longer would only make things worse. Her fingers tightened on the handle. It resisted, as though rust and time were fighting back, but then gave a reluctant groan as she twisted harder. The paint sealing the frame cracked in jagged lines, flaking to the floor. For a split second, she almost stopped. Every instinct screamed that opening it was a mistake. But then the knocking came again, louder this time, urgent, pulsing in sync with her racing blood. With a final wrench, the door broke free. The smell hit her first, stale, damp, and metallic, like old blood trapped in wood. She raised her phone's flashlight and peered inside. The attic stretched out before her, far larger than the house should have allowed, the ceiling sloping into darkness that swallowed the light. The floorboards were warped and stained, and in the far corner, she saw a small iron bed frame, its mattress torn open, stuffing spilling out like innards. Shackles dangled from its posts, their edges rusted orange, her throat closed, her breath catching in shallow gasps. She stepped inside without meaning to, drawn forward by a terrible gravity. The temperature dropped with every step, her breath now visible in faint white clouds. The dragging sound returned, circling the attic around her, though nothing moved in the beam of her phone's light. The boards creaked as though carrying footsteps, always just behind her, but when she spun around, there was only emptiness. Then her phone flickered. The light dimmed, sputtered, and in its failing glow she saw something written on the far wall, scrawled in jagged, uneven letters, "You shouldn't have." Before she could react, her phone died completely, plunging her into pitch-black silence. And in that dark, inches from her ear, came a whisper so sharp it felt like a blade against her skin. "Now we start." The attic swallowed Mara whole. The dark was absolute, smothering, broken only by the faint glow of her phone's dead screen. She clutched it like a talisman, useless but familiar, her only anchor in the void. Around her, the silence wasn't empty, it was alive. She could hear faint breaths that weren't her own, short and deliberate, moving through the space as though circling her in widening arcs. She stood rigid, knowing that if she moved too quickly, she might collide with something she could not bear to see. Then came the first step, a heavy, deliberate thud against the warped floorboards to her left. She whipped her head toward the sound, but the dark gave nothing back. Another step followed, closer, the wood groaning under invisible weight. Her body screamed at her to flee, but her feet wouldn't obey. The steps began to multiply. 2, then 3, pacing around her, shifting position faster than her mind could follow. She realized with dawning horror that whatever was moving was circling her in a slow, deliberate spiral. She fumbled in her pocket, desperate for something, anything, and her fingers brushed the small lighter she used for candles. Flicking it to life, a thin flame sputtered up, casting a trembling halo of light. For an instant, the attic was revealed in flashes, the bed frame looming like a skeleton, the words on the wall crawling across the wood, and in the farthest corner, a shadow too tall and too still to be her own. The flame stuttered, and she swore she saw its head turn toward her before the lighter snapped out. Her breath came ragged, her chest tightening as panic clawed its way up her throat. The footsteps resumed, faster this time, circling closer. She backed toward the open door, her hands outstretched, desperate to feel the frame. But the space betrayed her. The boards beneath her shifted, creaked, until she realized the door wasn't where she had left it. The attic seemed to stretch and warp, the exit retreating deeper into the dark, pulling her further inside instead of out. Then came the sound that broke her resolve, A low scrape, metal against wood. She knew it instantly, the shackles. Something was dragging them across the floor, slow and deliberate, as though being pulled toward her. She froze, the darkness pressing against her skin, and then the whisper came again, louder this time, right in front of her face. Run. She did. She bolted blindly, not knowing if she was racing towards safety or deeper into the thing's waiting arms. Mara's sprint through the dark was blind, frantic, guided only by instinct and the desperate hope of escape. Her hands scraped along unseen walls, splinters tearing at her skin. Just when she thought she was lost forever in that shifting black, her fingers struck a frame, the attic door. She stumbled through, crashing into the hallway beyond, her chest heaving with ragged sobs. Relief flooded her, but only for a moment. The hallway didn't look the same. The wallpaper was gone, stripped bare to reveal rotting beams. The light bulb overhead dangled from a wire, swaying faintly though there was no draft. The hallway stretched farther than it ever had before, impossibly long, lined with doors she had never seen. Each was slightly ajar, revealing slivers of darkness within. Mara backed against the nearest wall, realizing with a creeping terror that she hadn't escaped the attic at all. The house itself had changed, reshaped while she was inside. She forced herself to move, each step careful, deliberate. Her breath echoed unnaturally, bouncing down the hall as though the walls themselves were amplifying it. From behind one of the doors came a faint sobbing, childlike and rhythmic, rising and falling with a strange cadence. From another, a scratching sound, nails dragging down wood. She tried to keep her eyes forward, but every noise pulled at her, begging her to look. The doors seemed to lean toward her, their shadows stretching longer with every step. When she finally reached the staircase, her heart sank. It wasn't the staircase she knew. The familiar banister was gone, replaced by a spiral of steps that corkscrewed down into an endless black. A faint glow pulsed at the bottom, sickly yellow, like light seen through old water. As she peered down, the air thickened, heavy with the same metallic scent she'd breathed in the attic. Somewhere below, something moved, dragging itself slowly upward, step by deliberate step. Mara stumbled backward, her heel catching on the warped boards. She spun, desperate to retrace her path, but the hallway behind her had changed again. The attic door was gone. In its place, at the very end of the corridor, a single door stood closed, different from the rest. Its surface was blackened, charred, as though it had survived a fire. She didn't want to approach, but her choices were narrowing. Face the endless staircase below, or open the door that waited at the far end. Mara's pulse thudded in her ears as she stared down the endless spiral staircase, listening to the slow drag of something climbing toward her. Every instinct urged her not to wait and see what would reach her first. She turned instead to the far end of the hallway, to the blackened door that seemed to absorb the dim light around it. Each step she took toward it felt heavier than the last, as though the floor resisted her passage. By the time she reached the charred wood, her fingers were trembling so badly she could barely touch the handle. The surface of the door was rough, scarred, its edges warped from old fire. When she pressed her palm against it, the surface was warm, almost pulsing with a faint, sickly heat. For a moment, she thought she heard the crackle of flames, faint whispers carried within them. Then came the smell, smoke, ash, and beneath it something sharper, coppery, like blood baked into the walls. She squeezed her eyes shut, pushed the door open, and stepped into the dark. The room beyond wasn't like the warped hallway or the impossible attic. It was painfully real. For walls blackened by fire surrounded her, the ceiling scorched and sagging. In the center sat a small wooden chair, untouched by the flames, facing the corner as though in punishment. On the walls, beneath the soot, words had been carved deep into the wood. She raised her phone light, her hands shaking, and read them aloud before she could stop herself. This is where it ended. Her skin prickled, the air thick with suffocating heat though no flames burned. She felt eyes on her back, though the room was empty. Moving closer, she noticed something beneath the chair, a stack of yellowed photographs, edges curled from age. She crouched and picked one up. It showed the very house she stood in, but decades earlier, pristine and new. Another photo showed the upstairs hallway, and another the attic. The last made her stomach lurch. A young girl, chained to the bed frame in the attic corner. Her wide eyes filled with terror. The photographs slipped from her hands, scattering across the scorched floor. Behind her, the door slammed shut with such force the walls shook, plunging the room into choking darkness. The whispers returned, layered, overlapping, male and female, adult and child, rising until they became a chorus that filled her head. Through the noise, one voice cut through, sharp and clear, as if it spoke directly into her skull. "You opened what we buried. Now you belong here." The voices pressed into Mara's skull until she thought her head would split. She staggered back against the scorched wall, gasping for breath, her vision swimming in the dark. The photographs lay scattered at her feet, their pale faces staring up at her like silent witnesses. Her hand fell on one she hadn't noticed before. A blurred image of the fire itself, smoke pouring from the roof, shadows gathered at the windows as though watching from inside. And in the corner of the frame, barely visible, the outline of that same iron bed frame. The chorus of whispers shifted, separating into fragments she could almost understand. She heard the pleading voice of a girl begging to be let out, a man's rough command to hold her still, the crackle of fire consuming wood, and then a scream so sharp it vibrated her teeth. Mara clamped her hands over her ears, but the voices lived inside her head now, unraveling the truth. This wasn't just a tragedy. The house wasn't haunted by strangers. It was built on the suffering of someone locked, burned, and left to rot inside these very walls. The chair in the center of the room creaked. Slowly, impossibly, it began to turn, scraping across the charred floor until it faced her. The air thickened, pressing her lungs flat. A shape began to form in the chair, first as smoke, then as flesh. A young girl, her wrists bound in iron cuffs, her skin blistered and blackened. But her eyes were alive, glowing faintly in the dark. Mara stumbled backward, her phone light catching the girl's face just as her lips moved. No whisper this time. The voice was clear, raw, and angry. "You let me out." The floor quaked beneath Mara's feet, cracks splitting outward from the chair. Smoke poured up from below, filling the room, dragging with it the stench of ash and blood. She lunged for the door, slamming her shoulder against it, but it didn't budge. The voices rose again, drowning out her scream. From the cracks in the floor, hands began to reach, small, charred, skeletal, clawing at her ankles, tugging her down toward the blackness below. In a final, desperate surge, Mara wrenched the handle and threw the door open. She stumbled into the hallway beyond, coughing, her clothes reeking of smoke. But the house wasn't the same. The long corridor was gone, replaced by walls closing in like a throat swallowing her whole. The spiral staircase loomed ahead, glowing faintly yellow, still waiting. Behind her, from within the scorched room, the girl's voice carried out, shrill and certain, "You can't leave. You belong to the fire." Mara staggered into the narrowing corridor, her lungs burning with smoke that wasn't really there. Every step felt heavier, as though the house itself clung to her legs. Behind her, the girl's shrill voice rose higher, no longer a whisper, no longer distant. It was chasing her now, carried on the walls, on the floorboards, in the very air she breathed. Ahead, the spiral staircase glowed with its sickly yellow light, pulsing like the heartbeat of something alive. It was the only path left. She gripped the banister and descended. The steps groaned beneath her, warping and twisting as though they didn't want to hold her weight. The glow grew brighter the deeper she went, until she realized it wasn't light at all. It was flame, licking up through the cracks, illuminating hundreds of blackened photographs plastered to the walls. Each one showed the same thing. Faces pressed to windows, hands reaching from fire, the house consuming its own. As she passed, the faces in the photographs began to move, their mouths opening in silent screams. At the bottom of the staircase lay a door. Not blackened this time, but new, raw wood, almost pulsing with warmth. She hesitated, her palm hovering inches from the surface. The voices fell silent, all at once, the silence ringing louder than any scream. Then came the girl's voice, soft now, coaxing. "It ends when you come inside. You don't have to run anymore. This is where you belong." The words slid under her skin, filling her with a terrible calm that warred against her fear. Mara's hand pressed against the wood. Heat flared instantly, searing her skin, but she didn't pull back. Her eyes watered, the air filling with smoke until she couldn't see. The house groaned around her, shifting and cracking like a furnace about to collapse. Somewhere deep inside, she knew she had a choice: let the fire take her or fight it. With a ragged cry, she slammed her shoulder into the door, forcing it open, not caring what waited beyond. Only knowing it was forward or nothing, blinding light engulfed her, swallowing every corner of the house, every scream, every whisper. For a moment she thought she had escaped, until she opened her eyes. She was lying on the attic floor, phone clutched to her chest, the iron bed frame looming in the corner. The door behind her was sealed once more, as though it had never opened. And on the far wall, freshly scrawled in jagged strokes, was a single sentence that hadn't been there before. "Welcome home, Mara."